As a traveling salesman, William Avery Rockefeller was becoming part of an older America. Instead of using new technology to reach customers, he simply traveled farther to sell his products. Big Bill was always drawn west, away from the growing cities in the east and towards small frontier towns. In early 1853, Bill moved his family again. They traveled by train to a small town in Ohio called Strongsville, near Cleveland. Around this time, Bill slowly began leaving his family because he had fallen in love with another woman. This relationship was much more serious than his earlier affairs and eventually broke up his family. Instead of giving his wife Eliza and the children their own home, Bill left them to live with his sister Sarah Ann and her husband William Humiston. He paid them $300 a year to feed and house his family. After years of constantly moving, this must have felt very unfair. The family had worked hard to improve their lives, but now they had to depend on relatives and had lost much of their respect and status. The 6 Rockefellers had to squeeze into a small house already filled with 6 or 7 Humistons, even though Bill had plenty of money. Years later, Billy Humiston said that Bill was considered rich. He lent money with high interest, owned several expensive guns, wore fine clothes, and had diamond rings and a gold watch. This suggests that the move was not because Bill was poor, but because it was easier for him personally. The Humistons respected Eliza because she was smart with money and managed the household well. But living together in such a crowded house caused many problems. Billy Humiston later described William and Frank as wild boys and John as very serious and self-righteous. He said John was just as serious as he became as an adult. Luckily, the Rockefellers soon moved into a small farm on the edge of Strongsville. By this time, Big Bill had stopped working in the lumber business. He now traveled around pretending to be a doctor who used herbal medicine. He even appeared in the Cleveland Directory as a botanic physician. During the first year after moving his family to Strongsville, Bill came home only 3 or 4 times. People in Strongsville soon learned about his dishonest business. One day, a man named Joe Webster saw a hotel sign in another Ohio town that said, Dr. William A. Rockefeller, the famous cancer specialist. Here for 1 day only. All cancer cases cured unless too advanced. Bill gathered a crowd outside the hotel and gave a dramatic sales speech. Wearing a silk hat, black coat, and showing off his red beard, he called himself Doc Rockefeller. He claimed he could cure cancer for $25, which was a huge amount of money then. People who could not afford that could buy cheaper bottles of his medicine instead. When Joe Webster spoke to Bill afterward, Bill proudly admitted he had been pretending to be a doctor as far away as Iowa and was buying land there. After Webster told everyone back in Strongsville, the townspeople started calling him Doc Rockefeller, partly as a joke. The nickname stayed with him. In the fall of 1853, after 8 months in Strongsville, Bill decided that John and his brother William should go back to school. He took them to Cleveland, where they rented a room and meals from a woman named Mrs. Wooden for $1 a week. Because John's family had moved so often, the school made him repeat a lower grade. Many years later, John wrote that he felt deeply embarrassed. He had studied for several years at Owego Academy and expected to go straight into high school, but instead he had to attend grammar school for another term. For a proud boy like John, this was another painful humiliation during a difficult time in his life. When John was 15 years old, he finally entered high school in 1854. The school, later called Central High School, was small but highly respected. It believed that both boys and girls should receive a free education. To move up to the next grade, John had to write essays on 4 topics: education, freedom, the character of St. Patrick, and recollections of the past. At that time, America was arguing over whether slavery should spread into new territories. In his essay, Freedom, John clearly opposed slavery. He wrote that it was wrong, both against the laws of the country and against God's laws, for one person to own another. He warned that if slavery was not stopped, it could destroy the nation. John also believed that education was the key to progress. He wrote that when only priests and monks had knowledge, society did not improve. Real progress began only when ordinary people became educated and started thinking for themselves. These ideas reflected the beliefs of many Northern Baptists, who opposed both slavery and any system where a small group held too much power. As an adult, Rockefeller continued to dislike privileged groups like aristocrats and powerful religious leaders because he believed they stood in the way of hardworking ordinary people. John wrote very clearly and logically. His classmates called him John D. because that was how he signed his essays. He was also an excellent debater. Even though he was quiet, he could speak confidently and make strong arguments. In one speech, he began by saying, "I'm pleased although I'm sad." His classmates found this so funny that they nicknamed him Old Pleased Although I'm Sad. He also had another nickname, the Deacon, because he acted so serious and respectable. Unlike most teenagers, John actually liked this nickname. His future sister-in-law, Lucy Spelman, described him as a quiet, serious, hard-working boy who never liked rough games or loud behavior. He often carried his writing slate tightly against his chest, showing how careful and guarded he was. Although John liked being alone, he still had good friends. One of them was Mark Hanna ***, who later became a U.S. Senator. Another close friend was Darwin Jones. Darwin remembered that Mark Hanna and John Rockefeller were complete opposites. Mark was energetic, athletic, and always active. John was quiet, thoughtful, polite, and stayed calm no matter what was happening. Many years later, Rockefeller disliked hearing that Mark Hanna had supposedly said he was sane in every way except one: he was crazy about money. Even as a schoolboy, John often said he hoped to become worth $100,000 someday. Many adults admired John's serious personality, but others thought it was strange for someone so young. One teacher called him the coldest, quietest, and most careful student he had ever known. Even as a teenager, John expected adults to treat him with respect. He especially admired his school principal because he treated every student like a gentleman. John did not like adults who talked down to him. Since he already had many responsibilities at home and even had his own bank account, he felt more like an adult than a child. John was disciplined and responsible, not rebellious. He believed school was mainly to prepare him for work and adult life, so he studied seriously instead of learning just for fun. He later said, "I was very serious and hardworking because I was preparing for the responsibilities of life." John was especially gifted at mathematics. Lucy Spelman said he loved solving arithmetic problems because his father had taught him to carefully record every dollar he earned and spent. This habit of keeping accurate financial records became one of the foundations of his future success. One surprising part of John's teenage years was his love of music. For a short time, he even wanted to become a musician. He practiced the piano for up to 6 hours a day, which drove his mother Eliza crazy because of the constant noise. At that time, owning and playing a piano was a sign of a respectable middle-class family. John's interest in music also fit well with his strong religious beliefs, because church leaders approved of music more than many other forms of art. Living at Mrs. Wooden's boarding house taught John many lessons about life. Mrs. Wooden's daughter, Martha, was older than John and William, and they often had long, passionate discussions about different subjects. Mrs. Wooden also joined these debates. One of their biggest arguments was about charging interest on loans. Even though John was only 15 years old, he was already lending small amounts of money to his own father and charging him interest. John treated business as business, even with family. His father probably approved of this attitude. Mrs. Wooden strongly believed it was wrong to charge high interest on loans, so she and John argued about it many times. John cared more about questions of business and morality than many of the subjects he learned in school. Later in life, John simplified the story of his childhood because he was probably embarrassed by how often his family moved. He said they moved from Strongsville to Parma and then to Cleveland. But in reality, there were 2 more moves before Parma. John's school principal later told a story that revealed what really happened. One day in 1854, John asked him to help find a temporary home for his widowed mother, and 2 sisters because they were coming to Cleveland. The principal kindly invited them to stay in his own home, and John later said his mother was happy there. The strange part of this story is that John's mother was not a widow. His father was still alive, although he was usually away. This was one of the first known times that John lied to hide the truth about his father. More than 30 years later, when Eliza died before Bill, John even asked the minister to describe her as a widow at her funeral. It must also have been very painful for a teenage boy to ask other people for a place for his family to live. When Bill returned, he rented a house for the family in Cleveland. The landlord remembered John as a quiet, serious young man who mostly listened instead of talking. The landlord also said Bill always paid the rent on time. Before the year ended, Bill moved the family again to a 10-acre farm in Parma. John stayed in Cleveland and continued living at Mrs. Wooden's boarding house after she moved to a new address. A photograph from this time shows John with his brothers and sisters. None of them are smiling. John was now tall and thin, with neatly combed light brown hair. His clothes were always clean and tidy. Many years later, he joked that he had been much more serious between the ages of 14 and 25 than he was as an old man. While living in Strongsville and Parma, Eliza worried that her children might be influenced by taverns and other bad influences. She worked hard to protect them, especially as John grew old enough to fall in love. Ironically, John followed one of his father's habits by becoming interested in a young woman who worked in the household. Her name was Melinda Miller, a pretty farmer's daughter who helped with the housework. When the family moved to Parma, she continued working for them. John, who was 1 year younger than Melinda, often traveled from Cleveland to walk with her. Soon, rumors spread that they had become sexually involved. No one knows if the rumors were true, but Melinda's family strongly opposed the relationship. They believed John had no promising future and did not want their daughter to marry him. According to local stories, one of her parents even came with a horse and buggy to take her away and end the romance. Melinda later married Joe Webster, whose father had exposed Big Bill's fake doctor business. In the end, the failed relationship turned out to be important for John's future. He later married a woman from a better educated and more respected family. She gave him the stable home, strong religious support, and family life that he deeply wanted. At this point in the story, it is important to understand what was happening in William Avery Rockefeller's life. During the early 1850s, his behavior became much more extreme and dishonest. Bill loved using fake names. Even when he first came to Richford, he sometimes called himself Rockefeller instead of Rockefeller. While living in Owego, he sometimes traveled to nearby towns pretending to be an eye and ear doctor named Dr. William Livingston. By the time he moved his family to Ohio, Bill was living a double life. Sometimes he was Dr. William A. Rockefeller, and other times he was Dr. William Livingston. He chose the name Livingston from Livingston, where his father had been born. At first, the fake name probably helped hide his dishonest activities from his family. But over time, it became almost like a second identity. According to one of his later business partners, Bill used fake names because he practiced medicine without a medical degree or license. He was always afraid real doctors would report him to the authorities, and several actually did. In the last years of his lumber business, Bill traveled to Canada, where he bought valuable walnut and ash wood and sold it for a good profit. Later, he secretly moved to Niagara without telling his family and worked as a traveling doctor. As Dr. Livingston, Bill was a fake doctor. However, he partly believed in his own abilities. He had never studied medicine, but he was naturally good at treating some illnesses, and enough patients improved that many people believed he was a real doctor. His partner later said Bill had become well known in Canada and northern New York. Bill had a talent for finding kind, trusting women who would put up with his behavior. Around 1852, while his wife and children were still living in Owego, Bill met a beautiful 17-year-old girl named Margaret Allen in Ontario. Bill was about 42 years old, around 25 years older than Margaret and only 4 years younger than his own son John would soon be. Bill never told Margaret that he was already married with 5 children. Instead, he acted like an unmarried man looking for a wife. Margaret's family completely trusted him. Her sister later described him as a kind, friendly, hardworking man with good habits. He was a great hunter, an excellent marksman, and loved telling stories. The Allen family liked him much more than Eliza's family had. Bill saw a chance to begin a new life with a young woman who loved him and a welcoming family. On June 12, 1855, he married Margaret Allen in Nichols, even though he was still legally married to Eliza. From that day on, he secretly lived as a bigamist, a man with 2 wives at the same time. The author suggests that Bill's constant moves from town to town may have been connected to his secret relationships. He probably moved his first family to Cleveland because Ontario, where Margaret lived, was just across Lake Erie, making it easier to visit her. At first, Bill did not completely leave either family. He visited Margaret about once a year while continuing to support Eliza's family. Neither wife knew the other existed. For several years, he secretly balanced 2 separate families. Bill's second marriage probably changed John's life in an important way. John had always planned to attend college. His mother hoped he would become a Baptist minister. But then Bill sent him a letter telling him he would not be going to college. John immediately understood that he needed to find a job instead. He left high school in May 1855, only 2 months before graduation. The book suggests that the real reason was Bill's second marriage. Bill now had another family to support, so he reduced the money he spent on his first family without explaining why. John later said that he decided to go into business because his younger brothers and sisters still needed an education. Bill also expected John to take over many of the responsibilities of the family. During Bill's long absences, John became the person who looked after his mother and helped support the household. Bill never believed much in a college education. He thought a college degree cost too much and was not worth the money. At that time, many people did not believe a college degree led to a better-paying job. Instead, young men often attended business schools that taught practical skills. Following his father's advice, John paid $40 to attend a 3-month course at E.G. Folsom's commercial college. There he learned bookkeeping, neat handwriting, banking, business law, and other useful business skills. These practical subjects were exactly what John enjoyed. By the summer of 1855, he had finished the course, turned 16 years old, and was eager to leave behind the problems of his family life by starting a career in business. John's search for his first job later became one of the most famous job searches in American history. Although he grew up in small towns, his family had never been full-time farmers, so it was easier for him to move into the business world. Even though jobs were hard to find, John aimed high. He carefully studied the city directory and looked for companies with strong reputations and good credit. He respected large, successful businesses and wanted to work for one of them. Later he said, "I went to the railroads, the banks, and the wholesale merchants. I did not go to any small businesses. I wanted something big." Most of these businesses were located in an area called the Flats ***, where factories, warehouses, shipyards, lumber mills, and iron foundries lined the Cuyahoga River before it flowed into Lake Erie. John always tried to speak to the company's top manager. If that wasn't possible, he told an assistant directly, "I understand bookkeeping, and I'd like to get work." Even though he was rejected again and again, he refused to give up. Every morning at 8:00 a.m., wearing a dark suit, high collar, and black tie, he left his boarding house and visited company after company. He did this 6 days a week for 6 straight weeks. He walked so much on the hot streets that his feet became sore. Part of his determination came from not wanting to depend on his unreliable father anymore. At one point, Bill warned him that if he could not find a job, he might have to return to the countryside. John later said that the thought of depending on his father again sent a cold chill * down his spine. Instead of feeling sorry for himself, John treated job hunting as a full-time job. He later said, "I was working every day at my business, the business of looking for work. I gave it my full time every day." John strongly believed that hard work and persistence would eventually succeed. At that time, Cleveland was a fast-growing city with nearly 30,000 people. It attracted ambitious young people because business opportunities were increasing quickly. Many people had moved there from New England, bringing with them a culture that valued hard work, honesty, and business. Although many streets were still unpaved and the city had no proper sewer system, Cleveland was expanding rapidly. Immigrants from Germany, England, and the eastern United States were arriving every year. The city became an important center for trade. Coal, iron ore, salt, grain, and corn all passed through Cleveland. Because it was connected by Lake Erie, the Ohio Canal, and new railroads, Cleveland became one of the best places in America for transportation and commerce. Years later, John Rockefeller would become one of the greatest businessmen to take advantage of these transportation networks. Even though business in the city was growing, jobs were still difficult to find. John later remembered, "No one wanted a boy, and very few people even wanted to talk to me." After visiting every company on his list, he simply started over and visited many of them again, sometimes 2 or 3 times. Most young people would have become discouraged and quit. John did the opposite. Every rejection only made him more determined to succeed. On the morning of September 26, 1855, John walked into the office of Hewitt and Tuttle, a company that bought and sold farm products and arranged shipments. He was interviewed by Henry B. Tuttle, who needed help with bookkeeping. Tuttle told John to come back after lunch. John was overjoyed. He calmly walked out of the office, but once he turned the corner, he skipped down the street because he was so happy. Even when he was an old man, John remembered that day as one of the most important moments of his life. He later said, "My whole future seemed to depend on that day. I often wonder what would have happened if I had not gotten the job." After lunch, he returned and met the senior partner, Isaac L. Hewitt, a wealthy businessman who owned real estate and mining companies. Hewitt looked at John's handwriting and simply said, "We'll give you a chance." The company needed help immediately. They told John to hang up his coat and start working at once. No one mentioned his salary. At that time, it was common for young workers to begin without pay as apprentices. John worked *3 months before receiving his first paycheck, which was paid later for the work he had already done. For the rest of his life, John celebrated September 26 as Job Day. He celebrated it with even more excitement than his own birthday. This job completely changed his life. For the first time, he escaped the chaos of his childhood. He was finally free from constantly moving, from depending on his unreliable father, and from the unstable life he had always known. Sitting on a high stool in the office, John worked over large accounting books. From the window, he could see the busy docks and boats on the ** Cuyahoga River **. Although he started work early in the morning, in an office lit only by whale oil lamps, he loved every minute of it. He later said that the organization, order, and system of the office delighted him. Work gave John something he had never truly had before, a stable identity and a clear purpose. His duties were much more important than those of an ordinary office boy. John often described himself as a man of figures. He loved accounting and numbers. Because he had already helped his mother keep household accounts, bookkeeping came naturally to him. He later said that bookkeeping taught him to respect facts and numbers, no matter how small they seemed. He admitted that he became so focused on details that later in life, he had to make himself pay more attention to the bigger picture. Many historians believe accounting is one of the foundations of modern capitalism. John Rockefeller believed numbers told the truth better than emotions. To him, accounting books were almost sacred. They helped people make good decisions, discover fraud, measure profits, and find waste. He often criticized businessmen who kept poor records because they did not even know whether they were making or losing money. One of John's jobs at Hewitt and Tuttle was paying the company's bills. He took this responsibility extremely seriously. Before paying any bill, he carefully checked every item and added all the numbers himself. If he found even a mistake of a few cents, he corrected it. One day, he was shocked when he saw another businessman tell his clerk to pay a long plumbing bill without even reading it. John thought this was careless because he had already discovered that the same company had overcharged by a few cents before. His careful attention to detail probably saved Hewitt and Tuttle money. In another case, a ship captain kept asking the company for money because he claimed shipments had been damaged. John investigated by checking invoices, shipping papers, and other records. He proved that the captain's claims were false. After being caught once, the captain never tried the scam again. John's love of order may have come from growing up in a very disorganized and unstable family. Keeping everything organized gave him a sense of control. Besides bookkeeping, writing letters, and paying bills, John also collected rent from people who owed money to Hewitt. He was always polite and patient, but he never gave up. If someone refused to pay, John would quietly sit outside in his buggy and wait until they finally paid. He was so determined that people eventually gave in. Even 50 years later, John said he still dreamed about trying to collect unpaid bills. Sometimes he even woke up worrying that he had failed to collect someone's debt. Part of this anxiety probably came from knowing that if he failed at work, he might have to depend on his father again. Another reason was that John worked very slowly and carefully. Some people thought he was not very intelligent and believed he would never become successful. John was determined to prove them wrong. Even though Hewitt and Tuttle was a small company, it was an excellent place for John to learn business. Most companies at that time sold only one product or service, but Hewitt and Tuttle handled many different goods, earning a commission by buying and selling them for others. The company had started by trading food, but it had also become one of the first businesses to bring iron ore from Lake Superior ***. The business depended heavily on two new technologies that were changing America: the railroad and the telegraph. John later said that this job taught him a great deal about transportation. This knowledge became extremely valuable because, years later, his company, Standard Oil ***, would rely heavily on railroads to move oil around the country. Even a simple shipment of marble from Vermont required careful planning. John had to compare the costs of moving it by railroad, canal, and lake, and also decide who should pay if the shipment was damaged. Although he was only 17, he successfully solved these complicated business problems. John believed that every experience taught him something useful. On the last day of 1855, his boss paid him $50 for the previous 3 months of work, just over 50 cents a day. Then he gave John a raise. His new salary became $25 a month, or $300 a year, which was a big increase. Surprisingly, instead of simply feeling happy, John said he felt guilty. The author suggests that John's religious beliefs made him uncomfortable about enjoying money too much. He believed earning money was acceptable, but openly wanting wealth could be morally dangerous. John Rockefeller represented the ideal young businessman of his time. He was hardworking, punctual, careful with money, and believed success came through effort. He could easily have been the hero of the popular success stories written by Horatio Alger Jr., whose books taught that hardworking young men could become successful. According to one famous story, John once excitedly told an older businessman, "I am bound to be rich, bound to be rich, bound to be rich." As he repeated the words, he supposedly slapped the man's knee several times with excitement. John later denied stories that he had been obsessed with becoming rich as a boy. However, he did tell another story that suggests money fascinated him. While working at Hewitt and Tuttle, His employer received a $4,000 banknote, an enormous amount of money at that time. After his employer locked it in the safe, John secretly opened the safe, took out the note, and stared at it in amazement. He put it back, locked the safe, and then opened it several more times during the day just to look at it again. To him, it seemed like an unbelievable amount of money. The author believes this shows how deeply money fascinated John, much like his father enjoyed secretly looking at his own hidden cash. This is especially interesting because John claimed he rarely had strong desires. He once said he had never craved tobacco, tea, coffee, or anything else. Even if John wanted wealth more than he admitted, money was not his only motivation. He genuinely loved working. Business itself fascinated him. He enjoyed solving problems, organizing information, and finding better ways to do things. Later in life, he wrote that businessmen did not work only for money. He believed the real joy came from the challenge of the work itself, and that this satisfaction was greater than simply becoming rich. American culture at that time encouraged people to work hard and become successful. But many people also worried that the desire for money could become dangerous if it was not controlled. Because of this, people tried to keep themselves morally disciplined. For example, Benjamin Franklin kept a notebook where he tracked his good habits and bad habits every day. Many people in the 19th century kept similar journals. They recorded their spending, encouraged themselves to work harder, and reminded themselves to stay honest and self-controlled. Even famous businessmen like Andrew Carnegie wrote motivational notes to themselves. People wanted to become successful, but they also wanted to prevent greed from controlling their lives. John D. Rockefeller carefully watched and controlled his own behavior. Like many deeply religious Puritans, he constantly examined his thoughts, habits, and desires. He wanted his life to be orderly and predictable, not ruled by emotions or impulses. Sometimes, he worried that he was becoming too obsessed with work. He started work every morning at 6:30 a.m., brought his lunch to the office, and often returned after dinner to work late into the night. One day, he made a promise to himself that, within the next 30 days, he would stop working in the office after 10:00 p.m. However, he could not keep that promise. This shows how strongly he was driven by work, even as a teenager. John treated his personal life the same way he treated business. Since he trusted numbers, he kept careful records of all his money. Soon after starting work in September 1855, he bought a small red notebook for 10 cents. He called it Ledger A. In it, he carefully recorded every dollar he earned and every cent he spent. Many young people kept financial records, but John was much more detailed than most. He kept Ledger A for the rest of his life and considered it one of his most valuable possessions. More than 50 years later, he showed it during Bible classes with great emotion. He even became close to tears while turning its pages. He said he would not trade that little book for all the modern accounting books in New York. He protected it in a bank safety deposit box as if it were a priceless treasure. The ledger also shows that John was now completely supporting himself. About half of his income paid for his room at Mrs. Wooden's house and for laundry. He lived very simply. He later remembered buying inexpensive clothes because he believed it was better to wear cheap clothes that he could afford than expensive clothes that put him in debt. One purchase bothered him for almost his entire life. Instead of buying his usual wool mittens, he once bought a pair of fur gloves for $2.50. Even when he was 90 years old, he still said he did not know why he had wasted so much money on them. Another purchase later became meaningful. He bought camphene, a fuel used for lamps, for 88 cents per gallon. Years later, his company, Standard Oil, made kerosene so cheap and efficient that it sold for only 5 cents per gallon. Rockefeller often mentioned this to show that his company had helped ordinary people by lowering prices. Ledger A also answers an important question about Rockefeller's character. Some critics later claimed he only became generous after making a huge fortune. But the ledger shows that he had been giving money to charity since he was a poor young clerk. During his first year of work, he donated about 6% of his income. Some weeks, he gave even more. He donated to churches, poor people, and charities. By the time he was 20 years old, he was giving away more than 10% of his income. Although he mainly supported Baptist causes, he also helped people from other backgrounds. In 1859, he gave money to help a black man in Cincinnati buy his wife out of slavery. The following year, he donated to a black church, a Methodist church, and a Catholic orphanage. This shows that his generosity was broader than just helping members of his own church. Rockefeller's personality contained an interesting contradiction. He was fascinated by money, but he was also fascinated by giving money away. As a teenager, he read a book about Amos Lawrence, a wealthy businessman who thoughtfully donated over $100,000 to good causes. The book deeply inspired John. He especially remembered how Lawrence gave people new, crisp banknotes. John later said he hoped that one day he would also be wealthy enough to hand out crisp new bills to people in need. The author points out that, once again, money had a powerful effect on John's imagination. But this time, it was not because he wanted luxury or expensive possessions. Instead, he realized that money could also be used to improve people's lives and do great moral good. This idea became one of the guiding principles of his life. As if he already knew he would become rich someday, John Rockefeller carefully watched successful businessmen and learned how they behaved. He especially admired a wealthy shipping merchant named L.R. Morris. What impressed John most was that Morris did not show off his wealth. He walked and acted like an ordinary person. John noticed that many respected businessmen in Cleveland behaved the same way. They did not wear flashy clothes or display their money. Later, when he saw rich people wearing expensive jewelry and living in a very luxurious way, he thought it was unfortunate. This helped shape Rockefeller's own style. As an adult, he dressed simply and avoided the extravagant lifestyle of famous millionaires such as the Vanderbilt family. His Baptist faith encouraged modesty, but he was also copying the quiet, understated behavior of the successful Cleveland businessmen he had observed as a young man. At the same time, John turned to religion for help with the problems in his family life. Business and Christianity became the two most important parts of his life. Even when new scientific ideas began causing some people to question religion, Rockefeller's faith remained simple and firm. Because his father often behaved dishonestly, John was attracted to Baptist preaching about sin, personal salvation, and moral reform. His religion helped him control emotions and desires that he feared might be dangerous. After a childhood filled with constant moving and family trouble, he wanted a church that felt like a stable, respectable family. While living with Mrs. Wooden and her daughter Martha, John and William began attending a small church called the Erie Street Baptist Mission Church. The church was poor and struggling. It had been created after a long religious revival in Cleveland that had lasted 150 nights. For Rockefeller, the church became exactly what he needed, a community where he felt accepted and valued. A church leader named Alexander Sked became an important mentor to him. Sked was an elderly Scottish immigrant who loved the Bible and could quote large parts of it from memory. During services, he prayed with great emotion and enthusiasm. John respected him deeply. When John got his job at Hewitt and Tuttle, he went to Sked to share the good news. Sked congratulated him, but then made a surprising comment. He said he had always liked John's brother William better. John never forgot this remark. He was puzzled by it for the rest of his life, although he said he did not hold it against Sked. In the fall of 1854, John publicly declared his faith and was baptized by immersion. He officially became a member of the church. Although he was ambitious, he did not join a wealthy or fashionable church to make useful connections. Instead, He preferred the warm fellowship and democratic atmosphere of the mission church, where he worshipped alongside ordinary working people. The congregation included clerks, factory workers, shop assistants, railroad employees, artisans, and other people of modest means. Many years later, Rockefeller spoke warmly about these early church friendships. He said he was grateful that his youth had been spent among good people, working in the church and Sunday school. John did far more than simply attend services. While still a teenager, he became a Sunday school teacher, a church trustee, and an unpaid clerk who kept the church records. He also happily did humble jobs. Other church members remembered seeing him sweep floors, build fires, light lamps, clean sidewalks, greet worshipers, pray, sing, and help with whatever needed to be done. Even though he was only a young clerk with little money, he gave something to every church organization. He was extremely exact about his donations. If he promised to give 15 cents, he would give exactly 15 cents, never more and never less. He also studied the Bible carefully and regularly, and people noticed that he knew its contents very well. John D. Rockefeller treated his church like it was his second home. He did not just attend church, he helped with everything. He swept the floors, cleaned the windows, lit the lamps, chopped wood, started the fire, rang the church bell, and even put out extra candles after the service to save money. He believed, save money when you can, not only when you have to. He also encouraged people to wear their best Sunday clothes to work, instead of buying separate clothes. Every week he attended Friday prayer meetings and 2 Sunday services. He often led prayers and loved singing hymns with his deep voice. His favorite hymn was "I've Found a Friend," because it spoke about Jesus as a loving friend. Rockefeller believed the world was full of temptations. To avoid them, he stayed away from dancing, gambling, card games, and theaters. Instead, he spent his free time at church picnics and social events, playing simple games and spending time with other church members. Many young women liked him. It was not because he was handsome or wore expensive clothes. He dressed very simply. They admired him because he was kind, honest, hardworking, deeply religious, and always willing to help. One young woman named Emma Saunders became close to him. She wanted him to do more activities outside the church, but Rockefeller preferred to keep their relationship centered on church life. To him, the church was more than a place to worship. It was a family of good people. Rockefeller also believed church should feel welcoming. He disliked when people left immediately after the service. He thought everyone should stay, greet each other, and welcome strangers. He especially loved shaking people's hands because he believed a simple handshake said, "I am your friend." He continued greeting people this way for the rest of his life. Rockefeller also disliked being treated as if he were less important because he belonged to a poor mission church. The richer parent church often acted superior and tried to tell them what to do. This only made him more determined to prove that his church could succeed on its own. He believed the church should be managed wisely, just like a good business. One day the church faced a serious problem. It owed $2,000 on its mortgage, and the lender threatened to take the building away if the money was not paid. After the pastor announced the crisis, Rockefeller stood at the church door with a notebook. As every person walked out, he asked them to promise a specific amount of money. He encouraged them, persuaded them, and sometimes pressured them until they agreed. He wrote down every promise carefully. Over the next few months, he successfully raised the entire $2,000, saving the church from losing its building. This experience awakened an even stronger desire in him to earn money, not for luxury, but because he saw that money could solve important problems and help good causes. By the time he was 20 years old, Rockefeller had become one of the most respected and influential members of the church, second only to the pastor. John D. Rockefeller grew up with a simple country education. Most of what he learned about life came from his Baptist church. Throughout his life, he used Christian teachings as practical rules for everyday living, especially in business. Many people later wondered how such a ruthless businessman could also be so religious. But Rockefeller believed his church's teachings actually supported hard work, business success, and making money honestly. He never doubted that God wanted him to succeed. He famously said, "God gave me my money." He believed God had blessed him because he worked hard and lived according to God's principles. Rockefeller often taught a Bible verse that says, "A person who works hard will stand before kings." To him, this meant that diligence and hard work would bring success. He also believed that no honest job was too small. If you worked faithfully, you were serving God. In the 1800s, many Christian leaders believed that wealth could be a sign of God's blessing. Poverty was often seen as the result of poor choices or a lack of God's favor. Rockefeller accepted this way of thinking. However, he also believed wealth came with responsibility. He followed the idea of stewardship, which means your money really belongs to God. You are only managing it for Him. Rockefeller believed God gave him wealth because God knew he would use much of it to help others. He said, "God let me earn money because He knew I would give it away." Even as a teenager, Rockefeller enjoyed giving money to charity. He believed earning money and giving money were connected. One sermon especially shaped his life. A minister said, "Get money, get it honestly, then give it wisely." Rockefeller wrote those words down and tried to live by them. His life became a balance between earning money honestly and giving a large part of it to good causes. Some historians think this belief also made it easier for Rockefeller to chase enormous wealth. Because he planned to give so much away, he may have felt morally justified in becoming extremely rich, even when some of his business methods were aggressive or unfair. The famous sociologist Max Weber later explained that this kind of Protestant Christianity helped create modern capitalism. According to Weber, hard work was considered a duty to God. Saving money instead of wasting it was a virtue. Careful budgeting and self-discipline built successful businesses. Business should be run logically and efficiently, not emotionally. Wealth was often seen as evidence of God's blessing. Even rich people were expected to keep working, not retire to a life of luxury. Rockefeller fit this description almost perfectly. He worked tirelessly, lived simply, avoided showing off his wealth, treated business like a calling from God, and believed his financial success was proof that he was fulfilling God's purpose. The Puritans believed that every person should have a calling, a meaningful job or purpose given by God. Because of this, they believed the most important parts of life were serving God, working hard, taking care of family. They believed spending too much time on entertainment or luxury was wrong. They thought people should avoid wasting time, gossip and idle talk, chasing pleasure, living an expensive, luxurious lifestyle. They believed a person who wanted to become wealthy had to control their desires instead of giving in to them. The sociologist Max Weber explained that successful capitalism is not about endless greed. Instead, it is about discipline, self-control, careful planning, and saving money. In other words, don't spend carelessly. Work hard. Save your money. Think logically. Stay disciplined. These habits help people become rich. But Weber also pointed out a big problem. The same religious values that made people wealthy could later be destroyed by that wealth. As the preacher Cotton Mather said, religion created prosperity, but prosperity eventually weakened religion. This became one of the biggest struggles in Rockefeller's life. He spent much of his life trying to prevent wealth from corrupting himself and his family. Unlike some other Protestant groups, Baptists did not believe that being rich automatically meant God had chosen you. However, Baptists still believed that God gives different talents to different people. People should develop those talents. Honest work pleases God. Rockefeller believed he had been given a special talent for making money. He believed God gave him that talent. It was his duty to develop it. God rewarded him because he used it well. Because of this, Rockefeller never felt that his religion conflicted with his ambition. Instead, he believed his faith encouraged him to work harder and succeed. In 1857, while Rockefeller was still working as a bookkeeper, America entered a major financial crisis called the Panic of 1857. Many businesses failed. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs. People were shocked because the economy had seemed very strong only a short time earlier. Many leaders blamed too much borrowing, wild investing, gambling on stocks, easy bank credit. Many Christians saw the crisis differently. They believed it was God's punishment for a society that had become greedy, selfish, and obsessed with money. Instead of only trying to fix the economy, many people turned back to religion. This led to a movement called the businessmen's revival. Businessmen began meeting during lunch breaks to pray together. Many publicly promised to stop drinking alcohol, live more honestly, follow God more closely. Churches across America gained thousands of new members. Watching this crisis deeply affected Rockefeller. It strengthened two beliefs he already had. One, be financially careful and conservative. Two, stay deeply committed to God. Looking back years later, Rockefeller said that living through those difficult times was a great school of hardship that trained a young man. He believed those hard years taught him valuable lessons that helped him succeed for the rest of his life. Even though the Panic of 1857 hurt many businesses, William Big Bill Rockefeller continued making good money from his fake medical business. During this time, he was secretly supporting two families at once. In 1856, Bill returned to Cleveland for a while. He stayed with his sons John and William at Mrs. Wooden's boarding house while looking for a home for his first family. At the same time, he was secretly living part of the year in Ontario, Canada, with his second wife, Margaret Allen, using the fake name Dr. William Livingston. Bill rented a comfortable brick house on Cedar Street for Eliza and the children. It even had indoor plumbing, which was considered a luxury then. John and William moved back home from Mrs. Wooden's house. Bill then told John that, since he was earning money, he must pay rent to his own father just as he had paid rent to Mrs. Wooden. In 1857, Bill decided to build another brick house for the family before leaving them for good. Instead of managing the project himself, he handed the money to 18-year-old John and told him to take care of everything. John had to design the house, buy the building materials, hire a builder, negotiate contracts, pay the bills, supervise the construction. Despite already working full-time at Hewitt and Tuttle, John completed the project successfully. He even asked 8 different contractors for price estimates and chose the cheapest one. He negotiated so well that the builders actually lost money on the project. This proved John's remarkable business ability at a very young age. After the house was finished, another argument happened. John thought that since he had managed the entire construction, he should be allowed to live there without paying rent. Bill disagreed. He insisted that John still had to pay him rent for living in the house. Even Eliza protested, but Bill refused to change his mind. This showed once again how selfish and unreasonable Bill could be. Soon afterward, Bill left his first family once again. He moved to Philadelphia to live with his second wife, Margaret Allen. From that point on, John became the head of the family. He took responsibility for his mother and younger brothers and sisters, while Bill only appeared occasionally over the next 50 years. Ironically, Bill abandoned his family just before John began building one of the greatest fortunes in history. Because Bill left so early, he had no real claim to the wealth John later created. Eliza probably never learned that Bill had secretly married another woman. By this time, however, she was in a better position financially. Her father, John Davison, died in 1858 and left her an annual income, which later became a full inheritance. Both of her sons were now earning money. John worked as a bookkeeper. William also worked under John at Hewitt and Tuttle. Bill occasionally sent some money, but most of the responsibility fell on John. Eliza depended heavily on her eldest son. Unlike his unreliable father, John was dependable, hardworking, calm, and trustworthy. By her mid-40s, Eliza looked tired and sad. As a deeply religious woman in the 1800s, divorce was not considered an option. The exciting young salesman she had once fallen in love with had become a dishonest man who abandoned her. That painful marriage left both Eliza and John with a lifelong distrust of reckless, unpredictable people and a strong preference for stability, discipline, and careful planning. John D. Rockefeller was very good at judging people, even when he was still a teenager. At Hewitt and Tuttle, he respected his bosses but also noticed their weaknesses. He admired Isaac Hewitt publicly, but privately thought he complained too much and was always involved in legal problems. As Rockefeller became more skilled, he felt he was not being paid fairly. In 1857, when Henry Tuttle left the company, 17-year-old Rockefeller took over almost all of Tuttle's work as chief bookkeeper. Tuttle had earned $2,000 a year as a partner, but Rockefeller received only $500 a year, later increased to $600. He believed this was unfair. At the same time, Rockefeller started doing small business deals on his own, buying and selling flour, ham, and pork. These trades made him a little money and built his reputation. People at the Cleveland docks already called him Mr. Rockefeller. Several reasons made him decide to leave Hewitt and Tuttle. He knew from the company's financial records that it had nearly gone bankrupt during the Panic of 1857 and might not have a strong future. His father, Bill Rockefeller, had lent Hewitt $1,000. After John warned him about the company's financial problems, Bill immediately demanded his money back, and Hewitt repaid the loan. Rockefeller never liked staying in a business that was not growing. He asked Hewitt to raise his salary to $800 a year. Hewitt delayed for weeks and finally offered only $700. Rockefeller later said he might have stayed if he had received $800, but he was already planning something bigger. Around this time, Rockefeller's friend Morris B. Clark suggested they start their own produce business together. They had studied at the same business school and lived near each other. Clark believed Rockefeller was honest, reliable, and an excellent bookkeeper. Each partner needed to invest $2,000. Rockefeller had managed to save $800 in less than 3 years, which was impressive, but he still needed another $1,200. His father offered to lend him $1,000, reminding him that he had always planned to give each child $1,000 when they turned 21. However, Bill charged his own son 10% interest on the loan. Rockefeller accepted the loan without arguing because he knew how his father was. On April 1, 1858, using his savings and his father's loan, 18-year-old John D. Rockefeller left Hewitt and Tuttle and became a partner in the new company, Clark and Rockefeller. The business started with $4,000 in total capital. Rockefeller was extremely proud to become his own boss. After his first day as a partner, he went home, knelt down, and prayed, asking God to bless his new business. For the rest of his life, Rockefeller looked back on his 3.5 years at Hewitt and Tuttle with great gratitude. He believed those difficult early years taught him the skills, discipline, and character that became the foundation of his extraordinary success. He often said that struggling at the beginning of life was one of the greatest blessings a young person could have. Rockefeller was very good at knowing who would help him and who would get in his way. As he grew older, this skill became even stronger. He did not like people who treated him as if they were better than him. Even older and more experienced men had to treat him as an equal. He thought the Clark brothers acted too proud and looked down on him. Just like he had stopped respecting George Gardner, he also lost respect for the Clarks. They made the mistake of thinking quiet Rockefeller was weak. They did not realize he was carefully planning how to remove them from the business. Rockefeller never had a smooth relationship with Morris B. Clark. He called him an ignorant, proud Englishman. Morris Clark was tall, loud, and quick to lose his temper. He had worked as a gardener in England under a cruel boss. One day, he became so angry that he knocked his boss down. Afraid of being arrested, he escaped to America with no money or education. He later moved to Cleveland, worked as a woodcutter and wagon driver, and finally entered the produce business. Clark lived very differently from Rockefeller. He smoked, drank alcohol, swore often, and cared little about religion. Rockefeller disliked his bad language and behavior, but he still believed Clark was smart and worked hard in business. Because Rockefeller loved keeping careful financial records, Clark thought he was only a bookkeeper. He believed Rockefeller had no big ideas or vision. Rockefeller later said that Clark believed he could only keep the accounts and manage the money. It took Clark a long time to realize Rockefeller was no longer just a young boy. Rockefeller believed Clark became jealous when he started bringing in many new customers. This proved Rockefeller was much more valuable than just a clerk. At first, Rockefeller stayed quiet and accepted Clark's disrespect. He said Clark always tried to control him. Clark often asked, "What would you have done without me?" Rockefeller never argued because he believed there was no point in fighting with someone like that. Rockefeller believed he was the main reason the business succeeded. He kept the financial records, managed the money, and helped the company grow. He never told people when he planned to take revenge. Instead, he stayed patient and surprised them when the time was right. When the oil business started, Morris's brother James Clark joined the company. Rockefeller quickly began to dislike him. James had once been a prizefighter. He was strong, aggressive, and liked to bully people. One day he stormed into Rockefeller's office, shouting and swearing at him. Rockefeller stayed completely calm. He leaned back, put his feet on the desk, and showed no fear. When James finished shouting, Rockefeller quietly said, "You can knock my head off, but you cannot scare me." James realized Rockefeller was not afraid of him. After that, he stopped trying to bully him so much. Still, the two men could never work well together. Rockefeller also argued with James about business. He disliked that James secretly made dishonest oil deals. James even bragged about cheating people and tricking his former employer. This made Rockefeller trust him even less. Rockefeller carefully checked James's business expenses. James disliked Rockefeller because he thought Rockefeller acted too morally and called him the Sunday school superintendent. Rockefeller wanted honest business partners who customers and banks could trust. He believed that dishonest people would also become poor businessmen. Even though the business was making good money, Rockefeller felt uncomfortable having his name connected to dishonest partners. Later, the Clark brothers also hated Rockefeller. James claimed Rockefeller only handled money and even accused him of cheating him out of thousands of dollars. The biggest problem between Rockefeller and Morris Clark was not just their personalities. They completely disagreed about the future of the oil business. During the American Civil War, oil drilling continued almost all the time. As more countries bought kerosene, the company earned good profits every year. However, oil prices changed wildly. Every time a big new oil well was discovered, prices could rise or fall sharply. Nobody knew what a normal oil price should be. In 1861, oil prices changed between 10 cents and $10 per barrel. In 1864, they changed between $4 and $12 per barrel. Even with these huge price changes, Rockefeller and Andrews wanted to borrow more money and expand the business quickly. Morris Clark disagreed. He wanted to grow slowly and be much more careful. Rockefeller finally decided to separate from the Clark brothers because they had more votes than he and Andrews. They often used their voting power to force their own decisions. One day, Rockefeller borrowed $100,000 to expand the oil business. Morris Clark became very angry and said borrowing that much money was reckless. Rockefeller did not think it was a problem. He believed Clark was simply too afraid to take risks. He even called Clark an old grandmother because he worried so much about the company's bank loans. From the Clarks' point of view, Rockefeller was taking huge risks with everyone's money without properly discussing it with them. The Clarks found Rockefeller confusing. He was extremely careful with small business expenses, yet he wanted to spend huge amounts of money to grow the business quickly. This became Rockefeller's lifelong business style: dream big, but carry out the plan carefully. By 1865, when Rockefeller was only 25 years old, he decided he could no longer work with the Clarks. He believed the partnership was holding him back. Rockefeller believed the oil industry had a huge future. Before fully committing himself, he wanted proof that oil supplies would continue for many years. That proof seemed to come in January 1865 at a place called Pithole Creek. Oil explorers drilled there after using a forked witch hazel stick, believing it could find oil underground. Soon, they struck a massive oil well. News spread quickly. Thousands of people rushed to the area. Within a few months, a tiny settlement with only 4 cabins became a busy town with 12,000 people. About 50 hotels were built. There was even a theater with crystal chandeliers. The town seemed to appear almost overnight. However, it also became known for heavy drinking and wild behavior. One visitor said almost every other building was a bar. An 8-year-old girl named Ida Tarbell saw this oil boom happen. Her father built oil storage tanks there and earned more money than ever before. But the boom did not last. Within a few years, the oil wells ran dry because too much oil had been taken out, and fires damaged the area. People began taking buildings apart for their wood and materials. Ida Tarbell's father even bought a luxury hotel for only $600. It had cost $60,000 to build just a few years earlier. He used its wood, doors, and windows to build his family home. By 1874, only 6 people were left to vote in the town. Later, people saw Pithole as a warning that oil towns could rise and fall very quickly. But in early 1865, Rockefeller saw something different. He believed the discovery proved there was still plenty of oil waiting to be found. This made him even more determined to leave the Clark brothers. That January, Morris Clark again complained that Rockefeller wanted to borrow more money to expand. Clark said they had already borrowed too much. Rockefeller answered that they should borrow whenever it was safe and would help the business grow. The Clark brothers threatened to end the partnership, hoping Rockefeller would back down. Instead, Rockefeller secretly made his own plan. He privately spoke with Sam Andrews. Rockefeller told Andrews that the business had a great future, but he did not want to work with James Clark because he was dishonest and gambled in oil deals. Rockefeller asked Andrews if he would become his partner if Rockefeller bought out the Clarks. Andrews agreed, and they shook hands. A few weeks later, just as Rockefeller expected, another argument happened. Morris Clark again suggested ending the partnership. Rockefeller immediately accepted the idea. On February 1, 1865, Rockefeller invited everyone to his house. He strongly argued that the company should expand rapidly, knowing the Clarks hated that idea. James Clark became angry and said they should split up. Rockefeller made sure every partner publicly agreed to dissolve the partnership. The Clarks believed they had forced Rockefeller into giving up. Instead, Rockefeller rushed to the local newspaper and officially announced that the partnership was ending. The next morning, the Clarks were shocked. Morris Clark asked, "Do you really mean it?" Rockefeller calmly answered, "I really want to break it up." The business would now be sold to whoever offered the highest price. During the auction, Rockefeller stayed calm while the Clarks even brought a lawyer. Rockefeller represented himself because he believed he could handle the deal. The bidding started at $500. It quickly climbed into the thousands. then slowly reached about $50,000. Rockefeller already thought that was a very high price. The bidding continued until it reached $72,000. The Clarks offered $72,000. Without any hesitation, Rockefeller offered $72,500. Morris Clark stopped bidding and said, "I'll go no higher, John. The business is yours." Rockefeller asked if he should pay immediately. Morris Clark said he trusted Rockefeller and told him to pay when it was convenient. This auction became one of the most important moments in Rockefeller's life because it gave him control of the oil business that would later make him one of the richest businessmen in history. Rockefeller knew buying the business was one of the biggest moments of his life. He later said, "That day decided my whole career." Even though the decision was huge, he stayed completely calm. He paid a high price. He gave up his share of the commission business and also paid $72,500 to buy the refinery. But what he received was worth much more. At only 25 years old, Rockefeller became the owner of the biggest oil refinery in Cleveland. The refinery could process 500 barrels of oil every day, which was twice as much as its nearest competitor. It was also one of the largest refineries in the world. On February 15, 1865, a newspaper announced that Rockefeller had bought the business and would continue operating it under the name *** Rockefeller and Andrews ***. Rockefeller enjoyed proving the Clark brothers wrong. They had never imagined that their younger partner had secretly arranged enough money to buy them out. Rockefeller later said the Clarks finally realized that while they were talking loudly, he had quietly been making plans. He believed actions were more important than boasting. On March 2, 1865, the old partnership officially ended. Rockefeller never worked with the Clark brothers again. Years later, Rockefeller said working with them had been one of the hardest times of his life. He said the stress, humiliation, and pain were impossible to describe. Looking back, he believed paying so much money to separate from them was the beginning of all his future success. Whether the Clarks were really as arrogant as Rockefeller claimed is hard to know. But one thing is clear: Rockefeller was proud and very sensitive. Their insults stayed in his mind for years. Now that he was his own boss, he never again wanted anyone to stop him from carrying out his plans. At the same time, the American Civil War was coming to an end. General Sherman had marched through the South, and a few months after Rockefeller bought the refinery, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. Soon afterward, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The people of Cleveland were deeply saddened. When Lincoln's funeral train came through the city, many people gathered to honor him. By then, Rockefeller and Andrews had moved into a new office on Superior Street near the river. From his office window, Rockefeller could watch boats carrying barrels of oil from his refinery. Although Andrews was an expert at refining oil, Rockefeller took control of almost every other part of the business. After leaving the older partners behind, Rockefeller no longer had business teachers or mentors. He trusted his own judgment above anyone else's. Rockefeller had built himself into the businessman he wanted to become. While his business life moved quickly, his personal life moved more slowly. He knew he wanted a wife who was kind, religious, loved the church, and would support his work. Rockefeller had always been close to his mother, so he respected women and enjoyed their company. Unlike his father, Bill Rockefeller, he treated women with kindness. When he was in high school, he became friends with two sisters, Lucy and Laura Celestia Spelman. He especially liked Laura, who was called Cettie. Although Rockefeller was shy around girls, the sisters saw that he was warm and friendly. Cettie was interested in business and studied commercial subjects at school. She admired Rockefeller because he worked hard and honestly searched for a job when he was young. She believed he was ambitious and honest, and those qualities impressed her more than anything else. Rockefeller also understood that he needed to become financially successful before he could hope to marry her. There was a 9-year gap between meeting Cettie and marrying her. One reason was that her family was richer and had a much higher social position. The Spelmans were respected, wealthy, and well-known in their community. People thought it was surprising that Cettie seemed interested in Rockefeller because, at that time, he came from a much less respected family. Rockefeller admired the Spelmans because they represented the respectability his own family had never fully enjoyed. The Spelman family cared deeply about helping society. Harvey Buell Spelman and his wife Lucy worked hard for education, religion, and social reform. When they were young, they were poor. Mrs. Spelman even earned money by washing clothes, and little Cettie helped deliver the laundry in a small red wagon. As Harvey Spelman became successful in business, he did not focus only on making money. Instead, he spent even more time improving schools, helping the church, and serving in the Ohio state legislature. The Spelmans believed that faith should lead people to improve society and fight against injustice. Harvey Spelman was a deeply religious man. He believed God punished people for wasteful living and sinful behavior. He strongly opposed alcohol, believing it caused violence, crime, ignorance, and many other social problems. His wife, Lucy, was also deeply religious. She loved singing church hymns and cared greatly about the Bible, education, temperance, and expanding opportunities for women. She believed strongly in these causes and supported them throughout her life. Harvey and Lucy Spelman were deeply involved in their church. Because of their faith, they strongly opposed slavery and alcohol. Their home was part of the Underground Railroad, a secret network that helped enslaved people escape to freedom. Many escaped slaves stayed at their house on their way to Canada. The famous former slave and speaker Sojourner Truth also stayed with them for several days. Cettie said the only time she ever saw her mother cook on a Sunday was to prepare hot meals for escaping slaves. The Spelmans also fought against alcohol. Mrs. Spelman marched in protests, entered bars, knelt down to pray, and begged drinkers to change their lives. Mr. Spelman worked to shut down places that sold alcohol. In 1851, Mr. Spelman's business failed because of a financial crisis. The family moved to Cleveland. Although Mr. Spelman later became successful again, the family never forgot what it felt like to lose money. Because of this, they wanted Cettie to marry an honest, hardworking man who could provide financial security. They saw Rockefeller as a young man with strong Christian values and a bright future. Cettie encouraged him from the beginning to build a successful career. Laura Cettie Spelman was almost the perfect match for Rockefeller. She believed in hard work, saving money, responsibility, and faith, just like he did. She was short and slim, with dark brown eyes and brown hair. She spoke softly and behaved gently. But beneath her calm personality, she was very determined and strong. She was cheerful and friendly, but also serious and reserved. She had excellent self-control and almost never lost her temper. John and Cettie quickly realized they shared the same beliefs, especially about religion. She faithfully attended church and Sunday school. Her sister even thought she sometimes took religion too seriously. For Cettie, God and the church always came first. She cared very little about parties or social life. She and Rockefeller believed their faith should guide every part of their lives. She dressed simply and modestly. Although she had strong religious beliefs, she never forced them on others. Instead, she tried to lead by example. She believed church members should avoid activities like dancing and going to the theater because she thought they were too worldly. However, Cettie was not narrow-minded. She loved music, literature, poetry, art, and good conversation. She practiced the piano for 3 hours every day. She often played piano duets with Rockefeller. She was also an outstanding student. She graduated at the top of her high school class. Her graduation speech was called "I Can Paddle My Own Canoe." In it, she argued that women should think for themselves and make their own decisions. She believed women should not blindly follow other people. She also believed women deserved a good education. She said if women were allowed to study science, mathematics, and other subjects, people would stop questioning what women were capable of. These ideas showed that she strongly supported women's independence. In 1856, financial problems caused the Spelman family to move to Burlington, Iowa. Cettie and her sister stayed behind in Cleveland and became schoolteachers to help support the family. Later, they spent a year studying at Outsmarted Collegiate Institute in Massachusetts. It was one of the first colleges in America that accepted women. The school strongly supported Christianity, education, the end of slavery, and women's rights. The sisters listened to famous speakers such as Ralph Waldo Emerson, Wendell Phillips, Henry Ward Beecher, and John Brown. Cettie liked the school's strict daily schedule because she believed discipline and hard work were important. While she was studying there, she sometimes wrote friendly letters to Rockefeller. At that time, they were still close friends rather than a romantic couple. At Outsmarted, Cettie loved reading and writing. She wrote poetry, led the school's literary society, and edited the student magazine. In one article, she wrote that America had 3 kinds of powerful people. New England was ruled by intelligence. The southern states were ruled by old family status. The middle Atlantic states, especially New York, were ruled by wealth. She strongly criticized rich people who cared only about money and expensive clothes. She also complained that money had become more important than intelligence and good character. Her dislike of people who worshipped wealth matched Rockefeller's own beliefs. Ironically, neither of them knew that one day they themselves would become among the richest and most famous people in America and would live in New York City, the very place she had criticized. In the spring of 1859, Laura Cettie and her sister returned to Cleveland. They studied French, Latin, piano, and singing. Later that year, both sisters became teachers in public schools. Cettie was a teacher and also helped the school principal. Her sister taught boys in the same school. The family needed money, so Cettie had to work. She later said she was happy to do it. She became a respected teacher. Although she was strict, her students loved her. When she left the job, many of the girls stayed behind to say goodbye and cried because they would miss her. In the early 1860s, Cettie enjoyed teaching and was not eager to get married. Meanwhile, Rockefeller waited patiently. In 1860, Cettie wrote that she was not worried about staying single. However, she mentioned that one man, Rockefeller, had told her he was not in a hurry for her to marry, but hoped she would not forget the idea. She faced a difficult choice because women teachers had to remain unmarried. If she married, she would have to leave her job. By 1862, Rockefeller's produce business was doing well. He began seriously courting Cettie. He often waited for her after school and walked or rode home with her. The Spelman family lived in a beautiful area with apple trees and greenery. On weekends, John and his brother William often visited the area. After the Spelmans moved into the city, Rockefeller regularly took Cettie for carriage rides. He enjoyed telling her about his business. Rockefeller trusted her opinions. He later said her judgment was often better than his own. He even said that without her advice, he might have become a poor man. He was probably exaggerating because he loved her, but he truly valued her ideas. In the early years of their marriage, he even brought home his business account books so they could review them together. Although Cettie was slow to accept his proposal, Rockefeller never gave up. He patiently waited for the right time. By early 1864, he had become a successful and respected businessman. He dressed well in fine clothes and looked confident. He was handsome, with a straight nose, calm eyes, and a serious face. His hair had already started to thin at the sides. His eyes always seemed to be looking ahead for new business opportunities. Rockefeller rarely talked about how he proposed to Cettie. It seems another man was also interested in marrying her. Rockefeller feared he might lose her, so he finally proposed. People later said he proposed almost like he was making a business deal. Cettie accepted in the same calm and practical way. Soon afterward, Rockefeller did something very unusual. He spent $118 on a diamond engagement ring. This was a huge amount for him because he normally hated spending money. He probably wanted to show the Spelman family that he was now successful and could provide a good life for Cettie. After a 6-month engagement, they were married on September 8, 1864. John was 25 years old and Laura was 24. The wedding took place in the Spelman family's living room. Only close family members attended. Very few people even knew about the wedding. The newspapers did not report it. Rockefeller liked to keep important parts of his life private. His father, Big Bill, probably did not attend. Rockefeller bought a simple wedding ring that cost only $15.75. He carefully recorded the cost in his account book. Since John was Baptist and Laura was Congregationalist, ministers from both churches performed the wedding ceremony. Afterward, Laura joined the Baptist church. On the morning of his wedding, Rockefeller still went to work. He visited both his office and his oil refinery. He even arranged a lunch for his workers without telling them why. Before leaving for the wedding, he jokingly told the manager, "Treat them well, but make sure they work." Rockefeller planned every part of his life carefully. He scheduled exactly 1 month for the honeymoon. The couple visited Niagara Falls, Montreal, and Mount Washington in New Hampshire. On the way home, they stopped at Oried College. There they met 2 teachers, Sophia Packard and Harriet Giles, who would become important people in their future. Before this trip, Rockefeller had not traveled very much. He was curious about everything. At Niagara Falls, he asked the guide so many questions that the guide became distracted, drove the carriage into a ditch, and broke a wheel. Another time, Rockefeller questioned an old local man so thoroughly that the tired man finally said, "Come with me, and I'll tell you everything I know." Rockefeller loved learning and asking questions. People even nicknamed him the Sponge because he absorbed information from everyone. For the first 6 months after the wedding, John and Laura lived with his mother, Eliza. Then they moved into their own brick house nearby. Although Rockefeller now owned part of the biggest oil refinery in Cleveland, he and Laura lived simply. They did not hire servants. They were careful with their money. Rockefeller always remembered these early years with happiness. He even kept their first set of dishes because they reminded him of that simple time. By the end of the Civil War, Rockefeller had built both a successful business and a happy marriage. From then on, he focused almost entirely on growing his business. He would not waste time or energy on unnecessary things. His determination and focus would soon make him one of the most powerful and feared businessmen in America.